So you mentioned you were here on a Saturday. You come in on Sundays for a couple hours. You're here 5 to 7 days a week,
Right.
even though you haven't officially retired.
Right.
I don't know anyone who post-retirement would do that. Most people, I think, when they're done with their career, so to speak, they set sail and they rarely look back on the shores of their work. You are here, still very much in it, and I have to ask, what gives you that passion? What gives you that drive to keep wanting to come in every day and continue to do your work?
It's something that I have that almost no one will have in the future, is a collection of accumulated patient charts that are hard patient charts, paper charts, that are filled out primarily by me with diagrams and notes and photographs that I've taken in those charts that look back on 40 plus years of practice. Today, with the electronic medical record and shared patients across all kinds of services, the ability to have your own records is a thing of the past. So I've even discussed this with some of my colleagues around the country. I know when I was in Baltimore a few months ago, I mentioned what I was doing, that I was reviewing all of my old charts so that I could then form a complete patient name diagnosis database that then could be mined retrospectively to look at patients with different kinds of tumors, different kinds of simulating lesions, different kinds of treatments for certain things, different kinds of diagnostic techniques such as needle biopsies, and that sort of thing, and do that until I had at least a good retrospective descriptive idea of what had happened to those patients over the years. My principal goal in all this is with the uveal melanoma patients to determine whether there's been any improvement in survival for substage specific extents of the disease. It's my impression that there really hasn't been any, in spite of all kinds of new targeted therapies that have been developed for uveal melanomas. And the way we'll do that is I'll look at the survival follow-up of all the patients, and for those who I lost to follow-up, we'll submit their names to what's called the National Death Index of the United States. It's a comprehensive death index. You have to pay a fee, you have to have an approved protocol to do it, but as you do that, you can then at least find out if they've died as of a certain date and when they died. Now, I won't be able necessarily to tell on those patients lost to follow-up why they died.
Right, what the cause was.
But the important thing will be to compare all-cause mortality relative to the date of treatment and for the substage-specific categories of those patients. Because if there's no difference in all-cause mortality, there can't be any difference in terms of melanoma-specific mortality.
That's interesting. So there's actually a national index or service where you can figure out after applying whether or not someone has passed on.
Correct. And I've used that ever since, I believe, probably about 1985.
Oh, wow.
Periodically, I've surveyed it.
So this is a long-standing service.
Oh, yes. It's been around for a long time.
Is it? I'm assuming it's specifically only used for medical science, or?
Yes, really it is, for primarily medical science and for oncology more than anything else, because we're interested in the follow-up of those patients.
Right. So you mentioned to me, I think it was last week, that as you've been going through these charts, you have to go through it in multiple passes, and you're currently about halfway through the first one.
All right.
What
the
does
multiple
that look like?
passes are, I have to review every individual chart. I have to remove or discard all the charts of patients that I have no interest in the long term. Posterior vitreous detachment, scratched cornea, did an UBM examination at someone's request for uveitis or lens position, things like that. Those are just getting discarded. of the ones I'm retaining, I'm going through them page by page. I'm eliminating all duplicate pages, all blank pages, all unreadable pages, all extraneous pages, meaning things like the billing information on these patients, etc. And once I've done that, I'm taking the retained pages and making sure they're in chronological order. For any of the patients with fundus tumors, we have the fundus drawings and photographs and ultrasounds and other documents for them. I'm always checking the drawings because some of the earlier drawings were not well prepared. Especially when you're talking about larger tumors, ciliocoroidal tumors, it wasn't often put in the record very well where the posterior margin was, what the full extent of the tumor was. And if someone like a medical student or a resident or someone else were to survey those charts and try to figure out how big was this tumor based on some notes that are in the chart, he or she might be very misled by that. So I'm going back and either correcting the drawings that are there, or in some cases making a revised new drawing of that to correctly represent what was there, taking into account everything we know, including, when available, the pathology information. And I think it gives me a much better idea of exactly what we were looking at in terms of, again, substage specific categories. So TNM, or whatever other categorization you want to use, you need to know exactly the tumor dimensions and what tissues they involved in order to make that determination. That's why those are so important. And so I make all those changes in there. Then I also mark on the individual drawings my estimates of the accurate dimensions of the tumor. If they were small melanocytic choroidal tumors, I marked down whether there was or was not subretinal fluid, whether there were or were not clumps of orange pigment, whether there were drusen and or clumps of retinal pigment epithelial abnormalities overlying the tumor and attributable to the tumor. I also marked down where the tumor was located relative to the optic disc and fovea. And those, again, are all important in terms of various kinds of outcomes that we might look at. Once I've done that, I have to still go back to the chart and the inside front cover and make a notation about my diagnosis now, based on all that I know, not necessarily what I said the tumor was when I saw it the first time, but what I think it is now. And one of the things we will do later on is look back at how often the diagnosis that I make now differed from what we called it years ago. After that, we also mark in the front inside part of the chart the treatment that was given, if any, and the follow-up that was there in the clinical course. Some notations about that, including if they developed metastasis and when, and whether they died or not. So it's a very quick way of me just opening the front part of the chart now without having to go through it real quickly and know what the diagnoses I'm going to be recording on my name diagnosis list. So the next time I go through it, we can then get those lists prepared. So as I go through it, I'll have to record the name, diagnosis, management, things like that, but all from the inside front cover of the chart. Once I've done that, all of that information, of course, will have to be transcribed into a computer program, a database, where then I can analyze the individual subgroups. And we'll have to go back through those then again to abstract the specific information that's relevant to each of those kinds of cases.
And you have 40 years worth of data.
Yeah, we have, I've estimated there's about 13,000 charts right there that I have. And so far I'm eliminating about, it appears to be about 1 in 15, 1 in 12 perhaps, of the charts. So it's a substantial number of those are going to be pitched out, but it's still going to leave quite a number of them to deal with.
Right. How many do you think you've gotten through so far of the initial pass?
Of the initial ones, I've gone through, I think, about 40%.
Okay.
That's been since since April of 2019 until now.
And that's you coming in almost 7 days a week working on that. That's quite a feat.